I turned off the highway, expecting the same gravel lullaby my tires had sung for 20 years. Instead, I saw string lights, a white vinyl fence, and a 3-story lodge staring back at me from the edge of Ironwood Lake, my lake where Hannah's ashes used to rest beneath a lone pine. A banner flapped over Generator's Ironwood Shores HOA, lakefront luxury coming soon. A young deputy met me with a trespass notice for my own driveway. The HOA president, Brenda Cole, smiled like she'd already won and told me I should have answered my mail. That was the moment the grief went quiet and the math turned on. Boundaries can be erased from paper, not from earth. Permits can be stamped, but truth leaves nails sticking out where liars step. They built their empire on my ground, and they forgot the one thing I never did: who this land legally belongs to. Before we begin, comment your city and what time it is where you're watching. When I left Ironwood Lake 6 months ago, the air was colder, cleaner. I had promised my sister I'd stay until she found her footing after her husband's funeral, and I meant it. Hannah would have wanted that. But the whole time I was away, I dreamed of home, the cabin we built board by board, the scent of cedar from my old workshop, and that big pine tree where we spread her ashes. I thought coming back would feel like breathing again. Instead, it felt like drowning. The first sign that something was off came long before I reached the water. The road was wider, too wide. Asphalt where gravel used to be. New reflective signs where there had never been any. I slowed the truck, gripping the steering wheel tighter as my headlights caught something white and foreign on the roadside. It was a vinyl fence, bright and sterile, running along the ditch in a straight mechanical line. Someone had manicured the wild edges of my woods into suburban neatness. Then I saw it, the banner stretched between 2 aluminum poles: Ironwood Shores HOA, lakefront luxury lodge, coming soon. For a few seconds, I thought I'd made a wrong turn. But no, the hill, the turnoff, even the smell of the pines were too familiar. This was my property, my 20 acres, my grandfather's land. My heart started hammering, not from confusion, but from a slow, rising understanding. When the trees broke, I saw it, the shape that should never have existed. A massive frame of steel, and Tyvek 3 stories tall, facing the lake like a hotel postcard. Excavators slept under tarps nearby, their treads sunk deep into the soil. My workshop was gone, the little dock gone, the grove where Hannah used to sketch by the water, all gone. And in its place, a future amenities center banner fluttering in the evening wind. I parked the truck on what used to be my driveway, or what was left of it. Now it was a leveled service road for construction vehicles. Cement trucks were idling by the unfinished structure. A few men in hard hats gave me brief, uncertain looks. I got out, every muscle in my body trembling, and walked toward them. "Hey," I called to one, a stocky guy with drywall dust in his beard. "What's going on here? This is my property." He hesitated, clearly not the kind of man who enjoyed confrontation. "This is the new HOA lodge," he said. "Phase 1 expansion." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Expansion of what?" He shrugged helplessly. "Ironwood Shores. We were told the land was annexed, old property, abandoned or something. Look, lady named Brenda handles all that." The name hit like a nail to the temple. Brenda Cole. HOA, president of the community just down the ridge. I'd met her once, clipboard in hand, lecturing some poor homeowner about mailbox height. That kind of woman. A smile made of Teflon. Abandoned. That word crawled inside my head and stayed there. My land wasn't abandoned. I paid taxes on it. I kept it cleared. I just went to help family. I walked around the construction site, ignoring the stairs. My boots sank into churned mud where the pine once stood. Only a scarred stump remained, flat, clean, fresh. That was Hannah's tree. Under it, the brass urn we buried together 6 years ago. For a long moment, I just stood there, wind biting my face, my heartbeat ringing in my ears. My hand found the small silver locket around my neck. I'd promised her this land would stay untouched. Now it was being carved into rental suites. My knees almost gave out, but grief was quickly replaced by something colder: clarity. Whoever did this didn't just make a bureaucratic mistake, they erased me on purpose. That night, I drove into town every mile, sharpening my anger into focus. The Ironwood County office was dark, but I knew the Cole family liked to operate from home anyway. So I took the turn toward her subdivision, a sea of identical red brick houses trimmed in smug perfection. Her house sat at the corner, lights on an HOA emblem hanging by the door like a coat of arms. I rang the bell once. She opened it immediately, as if she'd been waiting for me. "Well, Evan," she said sweetly, coffee cup in hand. "Back from your sabbatical, are we?" I clenched my fists in my pockets. "What the hell did you build on my property, Brenda?" "Oh," she sighed, tilting her head with mock sympathy. The Community Revitalization Project, you should have checked your certified mail. We sent multiple notices about zoning updates and annex procedures. You didn't respond. Because there were no notices. I snapped. She smiled wider. The county recognized your parcel as abandoned after 2 years of inactivity. The HOA filed an adverse possession claim, perfectly legal. Adverse possession, I repeated the words tasting like poison. You stole land because I helped my family. I prefer to say we rescued it from neglect. The worst part wasn't her words, it was the rehearsed calm behind them. She had practiced this conversation, every syllable loaded with smug certainty. When I left, I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just memorized the sound of her voice. Because people like Brenda always overplay their hand, and when they do, the evidence hides in plain sight. The next morning, I went to the county recorder's office. A young clerk pulled my file, now swollen with new paperwork. Permits, variances, liens, all filed within the last 4 months. And each one bore the same forged pattern, the petitioner's name, Brenda Cole, notarized by Caroline Cole. Cousins, both of them. The county signature above theirs belonged to someone who had been fired last year for bribery. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a mix-up. It was a conspiracy built on nepotism and fraud. The clerk, noticing my silence, whispered, "Sir, you might want to talk to an attorney." I smiled tightly. Not yet. Because if there's one thing Hannah taught me, it's that patience can be a weapon sharper than rage. And if Brenda thought she could bury me under paperwork, she hadn't met the man who built this land with his own hands. They thought they built a hotel on empty soil. What they didn't know was that the ground beneath them still had a heartbeat, and it was mine. The next sunrise bled through the fog like a warning flare. I hadn't slept, just sat at the kitchen table of my half-gutted cabin, surrounded by blueprints, property records, and a cold cup of coffee. The silence was heavier than I remembered. 6 months away, and someone had rewritten my world while I was gone. But if they thought I'd back down, they didn't know who they were dealing with. By 8 a.m., I was parked outside the Ironwood Shores HOA office, a converted ranch house with banners reading Community First and Building Tomorrow Together. The irony could have cracked a window. Inside, a receptionist smiled the way people do when they've been told exactly how to. Her name tag read, "Tracy." "I need to speak with your president," I said flatly. Her smile faltered. "Mrs. Cole's in a board meeting, sir. Can I take a message?" "You can tell her Evan Miller's here about the land she stole." That broke the script. Her eyes darted toward a side office, and within seconds, a familiar voice called out, "Send him in." Brenda stood by the window, sunlight slicing across her crisp pink blazer. Her office was cluttered with framed certificates and a photo of her shaking hands with the county commissioner. Behind her, a large rendering of the Ironwood Lodge hung on the wall, my lake shimmering in digital perfection. "Evan," she said smoothly, gesturing to a chair, "I wondered when you'd come around. I didn't sit. You're trespassing. You tore down a memorial and built a hotel foundation over my wife's ashes." Her eyes flicked just slightly. "Tragic misunderstanding," she said. "The board acted according to law. The parcel was classified as dormant. We applied for an expansion permit under County Ordinance 14B. You can appeal, of course, but those things take time." I took a slow step closer. "You forged the transfer. I saw your cousin's name on the notary line." She didn't blink. "Careful with accusations, Evan. Defamation is still a thing." The confidence in her tone wasn't arrogance, it was insulation. She knew she had friends in the county office. Maybe even higher. "Then I'll start with facts," I said, "because I already have enough of those to bury you." For the first time, her jaw twitched. "You engineers," she murmured, almost pitying, "always think the truth is what's written in ink. But in real estate, it's what's filed in the courthouse." She turned her back on me, dismissing me like a child. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have investors to meet." I walked out before my temper burned through the thin thread of control I still had. Outside, the autumn air felt thin, like breathing through glass. I sat in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel. Brenda wasn't bluffing. She'd weaponized bureaucracy itself. And then the county SUV pulled up behind me. The young deputy from the day before stepped out, same one who'd handed me the trespass notice at the site. "Mr. Miller," he said, resting a hand on his belt, "got a complaint from the HOA. They're saying you've been interfering with construction and harassing workers." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Deputy, that's my property. My deed's in my safe." He nodded uneasily, like he knew how ridiculous this was, but couldn't say it aloud. He unfolded a paper from his pocket, a printed plat map with fresh ink, still gleaming. "According to this filing, your parcel's been merged under Ironwood Shores Community Commons Phase 1. I took the paper, scanning it. The dotted line enclosing my land looked like it had been drawn by a toddler. My name had been scrubbed off, replaced with Ironwood Shores Development, LLC. No corporate address, no registration number. A ghost company. Looks official, doesn't it? I said quietly. The deputy hesitated. I just go by what's filed, sir. But if you stay off the construction area, it'll keep things civil until the court sorts it out. Sure, I said, folding the paper carefully. Until the court sorts it out. When he drove off, I didn't go home. I went to the diner near Main Street, the kind of place where gossip travels faster than coffee refills. Rick Dalton was there, same stool as always, boots dusty from plumbing jobs. He raised a brow as I sat down. Words out, he said. They're saying you sold your place to a developer. HOA folks think you're trying to back out of some deal. My jaw clenched. That's Brenda's story. He leaned in. And people are buying it. She told the board you vanished for years, claimed you took a payout and skipped town. Skip town, I muttered. I was burying my brother-in-law. Rick's voice softened. I know. Folks around here know too. But she's got a way of talking that makes lies sound like policy. He took a sip of his coffee, then added, you should check your old shed. That's where the real paper's at, right? If she's faking filings, you'll need proof older than hers. That hit something inside me. Proof older than hers. My grandfather's records. Hannah's planning documents. The trust forms we'd made years ago but never needed. I left my half-eaten breakfast, thanked Rick, and drove home fast. The clouds had thickened, turning the lake silver gray. My property, my so-called abandoned parcel, was a construction battlefield. But behind it, past the torn fence line and the skeletal trees, my old tool shed still stood leaning but intact. Inside, dust floated through shafts of light like ash in water. The smell of oil and cedar still lingered. I knelt near an old filing cabinet and pulled out the bottom drawer. Manuals, tax receipts, a faded photo of Hannah holding our first dog, and then, under a stack of maps, I found a leather-bound portfolio, stamped Ironwood Family Land Trust. I froze. 5 years ago, when Hannah got sick, our lawyer had suggested putting the land in a trust protection from creditors, disputes, or future confusion. We did it out of caution, never thinking we'd need it. The document was still sealed, signed, and notarized. Not under Evan Miller, but the Ironwood Family Land Trust managed by trustee Evan Miller. I let out a shaky breath. Every permit Brenda filed, every lien she faked, every adverse possession claim, all of it targeted me, not the trust. Legally, she'd built her hotel on property owned by an entirely separate entity. She hadn't just stolen the wrong land, she'd stolen air. The air in the shed seemed to hum. My pulse steadied for the first time in days. I ran my hand across the embossed letters, feeling the weight of the paper, the truth of it. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for memory or sentiment. I was fighting with the law on my side. I closed the portfolio, stood up, and stepped outside into the wind. Across the field, the half-built lodge loomed wrapped in its gaudy banners. Workers hammered and shouted, unaware their project sat on a legal time bomb. I almost smiled. Brenda thought she'd buried me under paperwork, but all she'd really done was build her empire on someone else's foundation, and now I knew exactly where to start pulling nails. By the time the sun slipped behind the trees that night, the air over Ironwood Lake felt heavier, charged like the stillness before a storm. I sat on my porch, with the portfolio spread across the table, every page glowing faintly under the lantern's light. Hannah's handwriting appeared in blue ink on the first page, her neat cursive underlining the phrase, "To protect what we built." It wasn't just sentiment, it was foresight. She had known in some quiet way that this land might need armor long after she was gone. The Ironwood Family Land Trust wasn't complicated, but it was powerful. The land, all 20 acres, was no longer in my personal name. It was owned by the trust, a separate legal entity with me, listed only as trustee, not individual owner. That meant every permit, every lien, every filing Brenda Cole pushed through the county was built on sand. She had claimed possession against a person, not the trust. In legal terms, she'd built a multi-million-dollar structure on property that belonged to someone she didn't even know existed. I flipped through the pages again, the paper rough beneath my fingers. The trust documents were properly notarized, recorded, and sealed. Everything by the book. Every acre she'd bulldozed still belonged to me, well, to the trust. And that made her victory not just void, but criminal. But I needed proof stronger than paper, something that couldn't be dismissed as clerical, something physical, indisputable. And there was only one person I knew who could find that kind of proof. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Yeah, Dale," I said. "It's Evan Miller." A pause. then a low chuckle. Well, I'll be damned. You still kicking? I've got a boundary problem, I said simply. Boundary or neighbor, both. Another pause then. The sound of a match striking. I could almost hear him exhale the smoke. You got a map. Old survey, maybe 60 years. My grandfather's. Then we'll find your pins. He grunted. When and where tonight? After midnight, they've got cameras. He laughed again, low and certain. Then bring coffee, strong. When Dale Morrison said he'd find a boundary, he didn't mean metaphorically. The man had been a combat engineer before he ever held a survey rod. We called him Digger in the service, the kind of man who could locate a buried land pin with nothing but instinct and a magnet. He hated liars, paperwork, and anyone who thought they could steal what wasn't theirs. He arrived a little after 1 in the morning, his old Ford pickup coughing up dust as it rolled to a stop a quarter-mile from my driveway. I met him at the edge of the woods, the glow of his headlamp slicing through the darkness. He looked older, wiry, gray-beard hands like cracked leather, but his eyes hadn't dulled a bit. He opened the tailgate, pulled out his tripod, theodolite, and an ancient metal detector that looked like it had survived 3 wars. "Show me your map," he said. I spread the faded survey on the hood of his truck. The lines were drawn in pencil, the corners marked with hand-signed initials from 1961. Dale studied it in silence, running his finger along the border that wrapped around the lake. "They ripped out your pins," he muttered finally. "Probably poured gravel over 'em, but they can't fake contour. The ground remembers where it was cut." We moved like ghosts through the tree line. The construction site loomed ahead, floodlights humming like angry insects. Every time one of them panned our way, we dropped low, hugging the brush. Dale worked in measured silence, eyes flicking from compass to chain, counting paces like a man reciting scripture. After 2 hours, he stopped. His metal detector gave a sharp, shrill beep. He knelt, dug with his trowel, and then let out a satisfied grunt. From the dirt, he lifted a rusted steel rod 4 feet long, capped in concrete. My grandfather's survey pin. Still here. Still where it was meant to be. "Gotcha," he whispered. From that one fixed point, Dale rebuilt the truth. He marked new stakes, sighting each one through the theodolite, connecting them with bright pink ribbon that glowed faintly in the moonlight. When the final line stretched taut toward the lake, I saw it, the horrifying beauty of precision. The ribbon cut directly through the middle of the new lodge. Not just an edge, not a corner, right through the lobby, the elevator shaft, and most of the waterfront balconies. 80% of the building was standing squarely on trust property. Dale stood brushing dirt from his jeans. "They didn't nudge your boundary," he said. "They redrew the map. Amateur work. Fraud, if I've ever seen it." He handed me a small bundle of wooden stakes, their tips painted orange. "These are official markers. When you're ready, you pound them in. Just make sure someone's rolling a camera." I nodded, speechless. Before he packed up, Dale gave me a long look. "You've got 'em by the throat, Miller. Don't waste it. Folks like that think paperwork is a shield. What they don't understand is paper burns." By dawn, he was gone, his taillights disappearing down the dirt road. I stood there for a long time, watching the first sunlight hit the unfinished walls of the lodge. From this angle, it looked less like a triumph and more like a tomb, a monument built on greed and stolen ground. I went back to the cabin, poured myself a cup of the coffee we hadn't finished, and opened the trust portfolio one more time. Every signature, every stamp, every legal phrase gleamed like armor under the light. They had erased my name from county records, but they couldn't erase Hannah's handwriting from this page. And that, I realized, was their fatal mistake. Because paper might burn, but ink written in love doesn't fade. That morning I called the county courthouse and filed a notice of property dispute by the book precise, unshakable. Not as Evan Miller, but as trustee of the Ironwood Family Land Trust. I wanted Brenda Cole to think I was still playing her game, still trapped in her web of bureaucracy. Because when people like her think they've already won, that's when they stop watching the shadows. And that's where I'd be waiting with the law in one hand and the truth in the other. The first battle was over. The war for Ironwood Lake had just begun. By the time Dale's truck disappeared down the road, the eastern sky had already started to pale. The fog rising off Ironwood Lake carried that sharp metallic scent that always came before rain, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. The truth wasn't just written on paper anymore, it was staked into the ground. The land had spoken for itself, and the line it drew was merciless. When the sun broke through, it painted the ribbons pink against the gray timber frame of the lodge. They fluttered like tiny battle flags, each one marking a piece of land they didn't own. I snapped a photo on my old Nikon, the kind that still clicked loud enough to feel final. That image I knew would be Exhibit A when this all came crashing down. I drove back toward town with a strange calm buzzing under my skin. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but I knew one thing: I couldn't just accuse Brenda Cole. I had to prove her corruption so thoroughly that even her own allies would have no choice but to turn on her. My first stop was the hardware store, where Rick Dalton was stacking bags of concrete by the register. The man looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Morning," he said cautiously. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," I said, showing him the picture on my phone. "A boundary line." He whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. You mean to tell me that lodge is sitting on your land?" 80% of it, I replied. "I've got the original pins to prove it." Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "Brenda's gonna lose her mind." "She already has," I said. "Now I'm just going to make it public." He nodded slowly. "You'll need someone on the inside. Someone who actually knows how the county signed off on her permits." "Got anyone in mind?" He thought for a moment, then said Nina Torres, city inspector out of Fairview. "She hates HOA boards with a passion. Always said they act like kingdoms instead of communities." "I'll give her a call." By noon, we had a meeting spot, an empty grocery store parking lot 2 towns over. I parked by the edge of the lot under a flickering light post. A small blue sedan pulled up beside me, and out stepped a woman in her early 30s, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. She looked like someone who'd seen too many corners cut and too many signatures forged. "You're Evan Miller?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, handing her the photo of the survey line and a copy of the trust paperwork. "I'm not asking for anything illegal, just the truth." She scanned the documents for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "I've seen this kind of stunt before. HOAs using minor variances as loopholes. Brenda Cole filed something a few months back, said it was for a community storage shed. No one thought twice. The permit looked harmless, but she kept updating it, changing the structure type bit by bit. By the time anyone realized what she was building, it was a full-blown commercial lodge." "That's fraud," I said. "Yeah," she agreed, "but proving it's the hard part. Unless..." She scribbled something on a napkin and handed it to me. "That's the file number for her first permit request. Compare it with the one on record now. You'll see the bait and switch." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "And Miller. She's got friends in the county zoning board. Don't go to them first. They'll warn her." I nodded. "Then who should I go to the city records office?" "They're outside her jurisdiction. Clean people mostly." She turned to leave, but paused. "You know, she really should have left that pine tree alone. People forgive a lot of things. Desecrating a grave isn't one of them." Her words lingered long after she drove off. Back home, I spent the afternoon comparing permits. The original application, filed under Ironwood Shores HOA Phase 1 Community Storage Shed, listed a structure size of 12 x 20 feet. The updated permit, now stamped Commercial Development Ironwood Lodge, listed a 12,000 square foot foundation and 3 stories. There were no public hearing minutes, no environmental review, no rezoning approval. It was a forgery built layer upon layer, buried under administrative apathy. I knew what I had to do next. That night, I wrote out a timeline: dates, signatures, permit codes, photos. Then, with the trust documents and survey photos in a folder, I headed to the city records department at dawn. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I approached. "I need to see the active permit for parcel 1B204, I said. He flipped through a binder, then handed it over. "That's incorrect," I said, pointing at the owner field. "Ironwood Shores Development LLC doesn't exist. The legal owner is the Ironwood Family Land Trust." He frowned. "Do you have documentation?" I slid the certified copy of the trust and my trustee confirmation across the counter. "Filed with the county in 2017, stamped and sealed." He read it twice, then called his supervisor. They whispered for several minutes while I stood perfectly still, every nerve buzzing. Finally, the supervisor returned with a red ink stamp and pressed it onto the permit: "Suspended ownership under review." Just like that, the heartbeat of their project stopped. By the time I drove home, construction noise had already gone silent. The workers were gone, their trucks parked in uneasy rows, like abandoned toys. Even the flag on the sales tent hung limp in the still air. I watched from my porch as Brenda arrived in her glossy black SUV, storming toward the site office. Through the glass, I could see her gesturing wildly at a contractor, waving her phone like a weapon. She was shouting, no doubt, blaming everyone but herself. I didn't need to hear the words. I could read her body language. The Queen had just realized her castle was built on borrowed sand. An hour later, an email hit every homeowner's inbox. "Emergency HOA meeting, full transparency session tonight." She was going to try and spin it. I almost laughed. Let her. because for the first time since this nightmare began, the balance had shifted. The law was on my side, the evidence was in my hands, and now she was walking straight into her own spotlight, one she'd set up herself. That night, as I loaded my truck with documents and the bright pink survey ribbon, I looked out over the lake. The half-built lodge stood silhouetted against the sunset like a wounded giant. The reflection in the water made it look almost peaceful, almost beautiful, but I knew what it really was, a monument to arrogance. And tomorrow, everyone would see the line that split it in half, truth cutting through lies, as sharp as a blade. The Ironwood Shores clubhouse had never looked so full. Cars lined both sides of the street, headlights slicing through the drizzle as residents poured inside, homeowners in polo shirts, retirees clutching clipboards, and a few curious locals who just wanted to watch the drama unfold. A folding banner hung behind the podium, Community Transparency Meeting led by HOA President Brenda Cole. I almost laughed out loud when I saw the word transparency. She wasn't calling this meeting to tell the truth. She was here to control the story before the truth buried her. I waited outside in my truck for the right moment. From the window, I could see Brenda pacing by the front table wearing her signature red blazer, the same one she'd worn when she signed the first fraudulent permit. Her movements were sharp, mechanical, the kind of confidence that comes from fear wearing makeup. A laptop was set up on the center table, its green webcam light blinking. She was live streaming the meeting to the entire neighborhood Facebook page. Perfect. She had built her own courtroom, and I was about to make my entrance. Inside, the air buzzed with anxious chatter. People filled every folding chair, their voices overlapping like static. Brenda cleared her throat into the microphone, smiling with the brittle brightness of a news anchor who knows the teleprompter is about to betray her. Good evening, everyone. I know there's been some confusion about the status of our revitalization project, she began. Let me assure you the Ironwood Lodge remains fully compliant and legally authorized. Certain individuals, she paused, eyes flicking toward the back door, have been spreading misinformation about ownership and zoning. We will address those falsehoods tonight. I could almost hear the tremor under her polished tone. I pushed open the doors just as a few people started clapping. The noise stopped immediately when they saw me. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Cameras turned. Even the live stream chat visible on the laptop screen exploded with question marks and emojis. I walked slowly down the aisle between the chairs. My boots left faint prints on the carpet, still damp from the rain. I didn't look at Brenda. I looked at the audience, the neighbors who had waved at me for years, who now sat frozen, unsure which version of the story to believe. Brenda's voice snapped higher now. Mr. Miller, this is a private meeting. You're trespassing again. I set a thick manila folder on the podium beside her. Actually, I said evenly, this is about public records, and I believe everyone here deserves to see them. Gasps rippled through the room. I opened the folder, pulling out the stamped document, the one from the city records office, bright red ink glaring under the fluorescent lights. I held it up. This, I said, is a notice of suspension for the Ironwood Lodge construction permit, effective immediately. The city verified that the land legally belongs to the Ironwood family land trust, not the HOA, not Brenda Cole, not any shell company. All work on the site is officially unauthorized. The room erupted. Shouts, murmurs, phones, snapping pictures. Someone in the front row whispered, "Wait," what Brenda's face drained of color, but she recovered fast. "That's a clerical error," she said sharply. "We're already working with our attorneys to correct it. You can't just walk in here and—" But her sentence was cut off by a new voice. Calm, professional. "I can confirm the document's authenticity," said Nina Torres, stepping forward from the side of the room. I hadn't told Brenda she'd be here. Nina wore a navy jacket, her ID badge clipped to the lapel, and in that moment she might as well have been the voice of law itself. Every camera swiveled toward her. "The permit for Ironwood Lodge has been suspended, pending full review of ownership and zoning compliance," Nina said clearly. "Until that review is complete, all construction activity must cease immediately. Any further work could result in fines and criminal charges. You could have heard a pin drop." Brenda's mouth opened and closed, like she'd swallowed her script. She turned to her board members, two middle-aged men in matching golf sweaters who suddenly looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Say something," she hissed. One of them whispered, "We didn't know." That's when I stepped aside from the podium and let the silence stretch, let her twist in it. The live stream camera blinked steadily, capturing every bead of sweat forming along her hairline. Finally, she tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, forcing a laugh, "you see what we're dealing with: fake paperwork, rogue inspectors, disgruntled neighbors who can't move on from the past." "Fake paperwork," I said softly. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a glossy photo Dale Morrison's survey line, the bright pink ribbon cutting clean through the heart of her lodge. I placed it on the table where everyone could see. "Those ribbons mark the real boundary of Ironwood Lake," I said. "The one your contractors bulldozed over? 80% of your building sits on land you don't own." The photo spread like wildfire phones, snapping people, whispering disbelief, morphing into outrage. Brenda's voice cracked. "This is nonsense. We've invested hundreds of thousands into that property." I met her eyes. "Then you invested in the wrong coordinates." Laughter rippled from the back rows, nervous at first, then freer. Someone muttered, "About time." Brenda slammed her hands on the table. "You think this makes you a hero? You think you can just walk in here?" And I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Nina stepped forward again. "Mrs. Cole, I'm also required to inform you that falsifying or altering zoning permits carries serious penalties. You'll be contacted by the city attorney for a review." The audience gasped again. Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. "This isn't over," she hissed at me under her breath. "You have no idea who you're up against." I smiled faintly. "Neither do you." With that, I turned and walked out. Behind me, the room erupted into a mix of shouting and confusion. Someone yelled, "Wait, is this being recorded?" The livestream camera was still rolling, still streaming every second of Brenda's unraveling composure to hundreds of people online. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt lighter, cleaner. I could hear frogs croaking near the lake, oblivious to the war that had just turned in my favor. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one defending myself, I was the one holding the evidence. As I reached my truck, I glanced back at the clubhouse. Through the window, I saw Brenda slump into her chair, her face ghost white under the fluorescent lights. That livestream would circulate before sunrise. By morning, the entire county would know the truth: the HOA's queen had been dethroned on camera. But I also knew her type. Brenda Cole wasn't going to surrender. Not yet. She'd double down, find a new angle, and call in whatever allies she had left. And that was fine. Because for every trick she had, I had something stronger: proof, patience, and a plan that was just getting started. The live stream detonated like a grenade in the digital age. By morning, every phone in Ironwood County was buzzing with the clip of Brenda Cole's transparency meeting imploding in real time. Her bright red blazer and brittle smile had become a meme before sunrise. The HOA's Facebook page had more angry reacts than posts, and someone even remixed her, shouting, "This is a clerical error," into a dance track. For most people, that would have been the end. For Brenda, it was only the beginning of her unraveling, and my next move. I knew better than to celebrate. People like her didn't go down quietly. They regroup, rebrand, and weaponize pity. She would call in favors, paint herself as the victim of a smear campaign, and use the HOA's pooled funds to fight back. And that's when it hit me. Those pooled funds weren't hers either. Every HOA project needs money. Permits and contractors cost hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions. I'd worked as a structural engineer long enough to know the pattern: flashy renderings, big talk about revitalization, and debt buried deep in the bylaws where no one bothers to read. If Brenda had pushed a commercial project this big, she hadn't done it with savings, she'd done it with a loan. And if I could find that loan, I could find who really owned her little empire. I called Rick that morning, my voice still rough from lack of sleep. "You ever hear who financed the lodge?" He scratched his chin through the phone. "Rumor says some private firm out of the city. Harbor Ridge Capital or something. They do small-town commercial stuff. You think they'd talk to you?" "I don't need them to talk," I said. "I just need to buy their silence." Rick paused. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life." That afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office in Fairview. An old colleague from my engineering days, Mark Daniels, the kind of man who could read a contract like a preacher reads a confession. When I laid out the situation, he leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "You want to buy into the lender?" he asked. "I want to own Brenda's debt," I corrected. "She built a hotel on my land with borrowed money. If I become the lender, she answers to me." Mark's grin was slow and dangerous. "I like it. But this'll take finesse. We'll have to approach through a holding company so she never sees your name, and we'll need an opening, a partner looking to cash out. Find me one." He did. Within a week, Mark located one of Harbor Ridge Capital's 3 senior partners, a man in his 60s named Gordon Pierce, rumored to be retiring. We set up a quiet meeting at a golf club outside the city. He arrived in a gray suit and the kind of smirk that comes from a lifetime of lending money to desperate people. "Mr. Miller, excuse me, Northridge Holdings," he said, shaking my hand. "So you're interested in acquiring my share of the firm's active loan book?" "That's right," I said evenly. "All of it." He arched a brow. "Even the high-risk properties?" "Especially those," he chuckled. There's one you might find interesting, a development loan to an HOA up north, Ironwood Shores. The president's a handful, but the interest rates are excellent. Perfect, I said, hiding the pulse hammering in my throat. We negotiated over lunch. By the time the check arrived, we'd struck a deal. I'd purchase his entire stake, including the Ironwood Shores loan portfolio, for $1.2 million. Cash, quiet, legal, no press. It wasn't cheap, but justice rarely is. 3 days later, the paperwork cleared. My lawyer sent me the confirmation email at midnight. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations. You are now partial owner of Harbor Ridge Capital." I stared at it for a long time. Brenda Cole didn't just owe me a moral debt anymore, she owed me a financial one. On paper, I was now one of her creditors. She was building her dream lodge with money that technically I could call in at any time. And the timing couldn't have been better because Brenda was already panicking. 2 days after the live stream, the HOA blasted out glossy invitations for an investor gala, a desperate PR move to prove that everything was fine. An exclusive evening of champagne, community, and confidence the invite promised. They'd even hired a local news crew. It was the kind of event meant to drown truth in noise. So I decided to attend. The gala was held right in front of the half-built lodge under a massive white tent. String lights shimmered against the wet plywood. Caterers in tuxedos carried trays of hors d'oeuvres past piles of cinder blocks. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Brenda was in her element again, painted smile glass of champagne in hand, shaking the hands of real estate agents and pretending the suspended permit didn't exist. When she spotted me at the edge of the tent, her expression froze for half a second before snapping back into performance mode. "Mr. Miller," she said, voice sugary sweet. "Here to crash another event." I smiled. "Actually, I'm here to deliver something." The music dimmed as I walked to the center of the tent. I set a single folded document on the podium beside her champagne flute. "This," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "is an eviction notice. For this property, and every structure sitting on it." The crowd went dead silent. Cameras clicked. A reporter's pen scratched against paper. Brenda laughed, a brittle, sharp sound. "You're insane. You have no authority here. This is HOA property." "Actually," I said, pulling out a second document, "it isn't." I held up the official trustee certification for the Ironwood Family Land Trust. "This land belongs to the trust. As its trustee, I'm ordering you to vacate immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "You can't scare me with paperwork, Evan. You're a bitter old man trying to sabotage progress." "Maybe," I said, "but here's the fun part." I unfolded the third document, the one Mark had sent me 2 nights ago, the transfer agreement naming Northridge Holdings as part owner of Harbor Ridge Capital. I placed it in front of her. "You said this lodge was your dream project," I said quietly, letting the microphone pick up every word. "Well, congratulations. I now own the company that holds your construction loan, which means your dream is mortgaged to me." The silence that followed was electric. Brenda blinked once, twice, as the meaning sank in. Her hands trembled around her glass. "In 30 days," I continued, "when your payment defaults because your permit is suspended and your contractors can't work, I'll foreclose. I'll own the building, the loan, and the land. Every inch of it." She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then finally she laughed weakly. "You can't do that." I leaned closer. "I already did." The crowd erupted, reporters, firing questions, residents whispering, someone's phone camera catching every second. Brenda's face crumpled, her perfect composure melting into panic. She threw her champagne glass. It shattered harmlessly against a support pole, spraying her vice president instead. People gasped. Some even clapped. I turned and walked out through the muddy lot, my boots splashing in the puddles left by last night's rain. The night air was cool, sharp, cleansing. Behind me, the tent of lies collapsed, not literally, but spiritually. The HOA's golden project had just died in public. And somewhere deep inside, I heard Hannah's voice, calm and steady as ever. "Patience, Evan. Let them hang themselves with their own rope." She'd been right all along. Because sometimes you don't have to fight the monster. You just have to buy the bank that owns its cage. For a few days after the gala, Ironwood Shores went completely silent. The tent was gone. The champagne was gone. Even the workers had vanished. The half-built lodge sat there like a carcass, its skeletal beams dark against the lake sky. The HOA website was under maintenance, and Brenda Cole, self-proclaimed queen of community revitalization, had stopped posting entirely. It would have been almost peaceful if I didn't know her better, because people like Brenda don't disappear. They plot. Rick was the first to notice something strange. He came by the next afternoon holding a manila envelope that had been slipped under his door overnight. It was stamped HOA notice for immediate distribution. Inside was a 2-page letter filled with wild accusations typed in that same pompous legalese Brenda loved so much. She's claiming, Rick said, waving the papers, that you forged your land trust, that the documents are fake and she's got the original property records to prove it. I stared at the letter, my jaw tightening. Original records? She doesn't have the originals. They're in my shed. Rick hesitated. You sure? The words hit me like a slow-turning knife. That night I checked. The door to my shed where I'd found the trust portfolio was locked, just like I'd left it. But something felt off. The air inside smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. I knelt near the filing cabinet. The top drawer slid open easily, too easily. The box where the trust documents had been stored was gone. My heart sank. I scanned the floor. Footprints small, narrow, fresh in the dust. Someone had been here. Then I saw a faint reflection near the fence line outside, something metallic glinting under moonlight. A trail camera wedged between 2 trees. Rick. The next morning I called him. You said you use those motion cameras for wildlife, right? He chuckled nervously. Yeah. Why? Because I think you just caught a different kind of animal. An hour later he was in my kitchen with his laptop. He popped the memory card in, and a string of video clips appeared, infrared grainy footage time-stamped 2:14 a.m. The first frame showed the shed door. A shadow approached Slim, wearing dark clothes and gloves. Then the light from a small flashlight flashed across the face. Brenda Cole. She looked frantic, hair tied back, breathing hard as she pried open the lock with a crowbar. The camera caught everything, her rummaging through drawers, stuffing papers into a cardboard box, glancing over her shoulder before vanishing into the dark. Rick let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. I exhaled slowly. She didn't just break the law. She filmed her own arrest warrant. The next call I made was to the sheriff's office. The same deputy who'd once handed me a trespassing notice showed up 20 minutes later. He looked wary, like he was bracing for another headache. I've got proof of a break-in, I said, showing him the footage. He watched in silence, jaw tightening. When the video ended, he stood straighter. Can you email those files to me, Mr. Miller? I did immediately. He jotted notes, radioed something to dispatch, then said, please don't touch anything in the shed. We'll handle the scene. He drove off. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. The storm wasn't over, but for once, I wasn't the one standing in the rain without an umbrella. By 3 p.m., 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled into Ironwood shores. Blue lights flashed across the manicured lawns, the sound echoing down the cul-de-sac like thunder. Neighbors peeked out from windows, cameras ready. Brenda's house was picture perfect. As always, trimmed hedges, stone walkway, HOA-approved flag. She stepped outside wearing a pressed blazer, pretending nothing was wrong. The senior deputy approached calmly. Mrs. Cole, yes, she said, that old confidence creeping back into her voice. You're under arrest for breaking and entering, theft of private documents, and tampering with property records. She blinked. Excuse me, the deputy read her rights. Her voice climbed into hysteria. This is a mistake. Those documents were fraudulent. I was protecting the community. The deputies didn't argue. They just turned her around and cuffed her wrists. Neighbors poured out onto their lawns. Phones were up everywhere. One woman gasped. Another whispered, "Is that Brenda?" It was. They led her down the perfect walkway she'd once used to find people for weeds. The same woman who wrote warnings for mailbox height was now being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. The contrast was almost poetic. Rick stood beside me at the end of the block. You think she realizes this is being live-streamed? He asked quietly. Probably not yet, I said. But she'll know soon enough. The video hit social media before sunset, thousands of views within hours. The caption read, HOA, President arrested for breaking into homeowner's property. It was surreal watching the community that once worshipped Brenda's authority now turn on her with relish. The comments were merciless. Guess she finally measured the wrong fence. Turns out, community service means actual service hours now. By nightfall, the HOA board was in freefall. Brenda's vice president resigned, the treasurer stopped answering calls, and the HOA's bank account was frozen pending investigation. Someone left a stack of paper fines on my porch with a sticky note that said, "Guess we won't be needing these anymore." For the first time since this nightmare began, Ironwood Lake was quiet. No bulldozers. No HOA patrol cars. Just the wind brushing the surface of the water, carrying the faint smell of pine. But even then, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Justice doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with paperwork. patience and long nights of silence after the noise dies. Watching Brenda's taillights disappear down that perfect suburban street didn't bring Hannah back. It didn't undo what she'd destroyed. But it did something else. It drew a line. Not the kind marked by metal pins and ribbons, but the kind that separates the people who build from the ones who only take. When the last sheriff's cruiser turned the corner, Rick looked at me and grinned. "Well, Miller, guess you finally evicted the HOA?" I smiled faintly. "Nah, they evicted themselves." That night, I stood on the edge of the unfinished lodge. The moonlight reflected off the broken glass and scaffolding. Somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear Hannah's laughter, the one she used to make when I got too serious about blueprints and deadlines. "Looks like we finally won, Hannah," I murmured. But not the way I thought we would. The lake was still the kind of still that makes you believe it remembers everything. And maybe in its quiet way it did. For the first time in nearly a year, Ironwood Lake slept without noise. No hammers, no backhoes, no hollow speeches about progress. The lodge stood silent ribs of steel exposed against the morning fog like a monument to arrogance. When I walked along the muddy shoreline that week, the air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest. The land had stopped holding its breath. Brenda's fall was fast and complete. The day after her arrest, the county court filed formal charges, breaking and entering theft and falsification of legal documents. Her cousin Caroline, the county notary who had stamped those fraudulent forms, resigned within 48 hours, citing health reasons. But rumors spread faster than resignation letters. The entire Cole family name had become shorthand for corruption. The sheriff's office released the footage Rick's trail camera had captured. Within 24 hours, every local news station had played it on loop, the HOA president breaking into a homeowner's shed at 2 a.m., stealing boxes looking like a thief in her own kingdom. Overnight, the queen of Ironwood Shores became a meme, Karen of the Lake. I didn't smile watching it. Not really. There was satisfaction, sure, but also something quieter, a melancholy weight I couldn't quite shake. Brenda had tried to destroy everything I loved, and in the end, she'd destroyed herself instead. It was almost too fitting. The HOA board collapsed soon after. The vice president, the same man who'd been drenched in champagne at the gala, quit the next day. The treasurer deleted the HOA's social media accounts. For a while, the neighborhood existed in limbo, leaderless, and strangely peaceful. It was like a cult waking up from a long, ridiculous dream. 2 weeks later, the county judge handed down her sentence probation, community service restitution for property damage, and a permanent restraining order keeping her 500 yards away from my land. She'd spend her weekends picking up trash on the same roadside where her banners once hung. Ironwood Shores wasn't a kingdom anymore. It was just a neighborhood. But justice didn't mean closure. The lake still bore scars, deep tracks where bulldozers had torn up soil, and the empty foundation where the pine tree had stood. I knew I had to fix it, not for vengeance, but for Hannah. So I went to work. First, I filed a quiet title action, clearing every trace of the HOA's fraudulent filings from the record. It took 3 hearings, a mountain of paperwork, and a sympathetic judge. But when it was done, the county clerk stamped the final deed, the Ironwood Family Land Trust, sole legal owner. Watching that red stamp hit the paper was like feeling the ground steady under my feet again. Then came the cleanup. Rick gathered volunteers, neighbors, veterans, even a few people who'd once been on Brenda's side. They brought tools, coffee, and cautious apologies. One man I barely knew, a retired teacher, said, "We should have seen what she was doing sooner." I nodded. We all should have. We cleared debris, tore down the now leasing signs, and ripped out the last of the HOA banners. The sound of laughter started to return to the property, real laughter, not the brittle kind Brenda used at her parties. For the first time in years, Ironwood Lake felt like a community again. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to demolish the half-built lodge. I was going to reclaim it. I called Dale Morrison again. He arrived in his same beat-up truck, stepping out with that crooked grin. "You really want to keep this mess standing?" he asked. "Not as a lodge," I said. "As something better." He squinted toward the skeletal structure. "Better, huh? You got a plan." I handed him a sketch. Hannah's old stationery, the edges yellowed with time. A community workshop on the first floor. Training rooms for veterans up top. Affordable housing for families just starting out. We'll call it Ironwood Center. Dale studied the drawing, then nodded slowly. "Your wife would have liked that." I know, word spread faster than I expected. By the following weekend, more than 30 people showed up, neighbors with tool belts, veterans from the local Legion Hall, even students from the technical college downtown. Nina Torres came too off duty this time, bringing a tray of cookies instead of inspection forms. The sound of hammers replaced the sound of anger. Ladders clattered, laughter echoed through unfinished hallways, and the once cursed building began to take shape again. It wasn't a monument to greed anymore, it was a symbol of rebirth. On the third weekend, as we finished sealing the roof, Rick brought a small pine sapling. For the spot by the lake, he said quietly. I planted it myself. The soil was cool and damp, the same patch where the old pine had stood for decades. When I placed the new roots in the ground, it felt like I was planting more than a tree. It was a promise to protect, to rebuild, to remember. I set a small bronze plaque at its base, Hannah's view always home. When the sun dipped below the trees, the lake reflected its orange fire across the ripples. Neighbors lingered on the shore, talking softly, kids skipping stones. It wasn't just my victory anymore, it was everyone's. The transformation didn't stop there. A few months later, Ironwood Center officially opened. The county newspaper covered it under the headline, "From HOA Nightmare to Haven Community Reclaims the Lake." We held an open house, simple and quiet. Brenda's name was never mentioned. She didn't need to be. Her absence was its own monument. That night, as I locked the doors of the new center, I stood for a long while on the porch, staring out at the calm water. The reflection of the pine flickered in the moonlight. I could almost hear Hannah whispering, "You kept it safe." Maybe I had. But what mattered more was what came after. Because the real victory wasn't in defeating Brenda Cole. It was in proving that one person, no matter how small, can still fight a system built on greed and win. It was in showing that a community can heal after corruption, that kindness can grow from ruin, and that even the most ordinary piece of land can hold extraordinary strength when it's protected by the right hands. Before I went inside, I looked back once more at the lake and smiled. "Rest easy, Hannah," I said softly. "They'll never take this place again." And for the first time since she was gone, I believed it. The lesson of Ironwood Lake isn't about revenge, it's about redemption. About knowing when to fight with fury and when to rebuild with grace. Laws can be twisted, property can be stolen, but real truth roots itself deep like a pine tree that refuses to die. If you've ever faced a bully, an HOA, a boss, or anyone who thought power made them untouchable, remember this. The ground beneath them is never as solid as they think. Stand firm. Plant your own line in the dirt. And when the storm finally passes, build something beautiful where their lies once stood. Don't forget to leave a comment with where you're watching from, and subscribe for more true HOA stories that prove justice still lives in ordinary hands.